Hey everybody, so quick tease before we get into the meat of this video. Stick around till after this video is over because I have a really exciting announcement about a project that I have been working on for the past year, and I am so pumped to tell you all about it, so please stick around after the end of the video. But enough of Jessie being a little bit of a tease, let's get on with what you actually came for. Maybe some of you came for me being a tease. I don't know. Do you. I'm here for you. Anyway, stick around after the video and enjoy what this video is. Oh yeah, this feels good. I feel like this is the end of my transition, everybody. This is what it was all for. Though I feel like given a long enough time scale, this is what every trans girl will digivolve into. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Every trans woman wants to either be a cyberpunk warrior or an anime girl. Or a cyberpunk anime girl. Anyways, now that I've been a nerdy ass trans woman at you, let's actually talk about what this video is about. If you were perusing transgender Twitter, which I say now realizing all the stuff going on with Elon Musk might be a sentence that will age badly by the time even this video comes out, because heaven knows that thing's going down fast. But regardless, if you were perusing transgender Twitter at the end of 2021, you might have noticed amongst the anime avatars Keanu Reeves standing or anger at anti-transgender legislations that there was a bunch of giggling going on. And I mean both literal and not literal, because the joviality was focused on a brand new app called Giggle. But what is a Giggle, you may ask? Well, Giggle, with a lowercase g so it's less scary looking, is a social media app for your phone designed for, quote, females only.
So we state that Giggle is a platform for females where women can connect and talk on a social media feed free from misogynistic abuse and mansplaining.
Despite that description that makes it sound like a Ferengi's favorite dating app,
Yes.
in fact, according to Giggle's website, the goal of Giggle is to
Envision a world where female spaces are respected as necessary, where misogyny is eliminated through mutual understanding, and the equality of opportunity for all humans is desired and achieved through cooperation.
dang, eliminating misogyny. Big goal for an app, but I guess I'd rather that than whatever Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse aims were.
Boy.
Oh, hey, Mark. Hey, what's going on?
Hi.
What's up, Mark?
Whoa, we're floating in space?
So I'm here for it. It all sounds quite nice. So why were all the trans gals getting giggly about Giggle? Well, the reason centered on how Giggle ensured its female-only space. Namely, it asked users to take a selfie that would then be analyzed by AI facial recognition technology to determine if that person was female. And the way it determined if someone was female was based primarily on bone structure, which doesn't sound at all like it'll have issues. Oh, and by the way, before we get too far into this, I know there is a debate about calling algorithms like this AI or artificial intelligence. Still, it is the colloquial way that we discuss them today, so that's the term that I'm going to use for this video, but I know all of you computer science friends out there are going to wince every time I do, and for that, I deeply apologize. As a result of that, let's just say controversial choice for now, after its 2020 introduction, Giggle was quickly accused of being transphobic, as its facial recognition technology had a hard time recognizing some transgender women, as well as people of color, and letting them be able to access the app, something that the company admitted to openly even before the backlash. Yet, despite this difficulty with trans women and people of color getting onto the platform, the app said at the time that trans people were still welcome on the app. However, that didn't stay the case for long. The app was trending in 2021 because it was discovered that trans women who could get on the app were quickly being booted off of it. Further, it turns out the previously trans-inclusive policy no longer existed, with Giggle CEO Sal Grover telling Pink News,
No males are encouraged to join Giggle.
and in the words of the beautiful, beautiful Scott Bakula, oh boy. Between calling trans women males and the protection of, quote, female-only spaces, trans women have certainly heard this tune before. Not only that, Grover, after the initial transphobic allegations in late 2020, began to appear in interviews to argue that journalists and trans activists were targeting her, harassing her for just wanting to make a safe space for women, and how trans people were attempting to invade a female-only space, namely her app.
And I was like, what the hell is happening? And we were getting all of these like 1-star reviews saying you're transphobic and you're a TERF. And I'm going, one, I was like, what the hell is a TERF? And two, I was like, but trans women are welcome. Both groups told me to educate myself. And so I was like, okay, I will. That's a fair thing to say. And it took minutes to see that the feminists were right. Minutes. Not a lie amongst them.
Oh, and by the way, make sure to download now wherever your apps are available.
And then I also found the gender critical subreddit that no longer exists, but can be recreated on Giggle Talk.
Ooh, okay. Listeners, take note of that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
If all of that sounds familiar, it reflects much of gender-critical, sometimes known as TERF, rhetoric around trans women. A common refrain in TERF rhetoric is the idea that trans women are just men, attempting to invade women's spaces and co-opt it for our own nefarious needs. They also argue that we are ignorant of reality and believe that we are women when we're actually just men, and we somehow have a mental illness that makes us unable to recognize that biological reality. TERFs argue that we are simultaneously men maliciously attacking women and know that fact, as well as also thinking that we are mentally ill and don't realize that we're women even though we're supposedly men. Those two things don't seem compatible. Yet it makes us sound strong and weak at the same time. It's a very by-the-books rhetoric around trans people by gender-critical feminists that has been told over and over again, and if you don't know what these rhetorics and arguments are, I suggest you check out this video that I did that goes over all of it and why it's harmful not only to trans women, but all women in general. We'll get into that ideology a little bit more in just a bit, but if you want more of an overview beyond this specific situation that I'm going to be talking about, there's that video for you. Yet Grover used these arguments while wielding her apparent cancellation by those calling her transphobic for just trying to protect women in order to sell her app.
So we are on the App Store and Google Play. Just type in Giggle and you will find us there, ready to go.
It's the same type of dynamic we often see when cancel culture narratives are used. Take valid criticism of your work, make it seem like a personal attack, then wield that to sell your product to a niche audience who now view those attacking you as their enemy, and that buying your product is now a moral good in retaliation against them. Everyone from Daily Wire host Matt Walsh to comedian Dave Chappelle uses this same path to sell their merch over and over and over again, despite these people continually being given a platform to argue that they're being canceled. I mean, hell, Dave Chappelle was just on SNL.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dave Chappelle!
See, if you had some kind of issue, you know what I mean, you might go out to Hollywood and your mind might start connecting some kind of lines, and you could maybe adopt the delusion that the Jews run show business. It's not a crazy thing to think, but it's a crazy thing to say out loud in a climate like this.
Definitely was a canceled man, right? And Grover was doing much the same, not only appearing on places like Fox News, but even appearing in many gender-critical spaces, doing interviews with prominent figures in the movement like Grant Littleham, and working with the LGB Alliance in Britain.
Is it open to people, to, let's say, men who identify as female?
Well, are they female? I mean, are they biologically female?
That's the bottom line.
Ah, Glinner. We never can seem to escape you, can we? Unlike your wife and kid, it seems like we're stuck with you till the end, I guess. But the reason that Giggle went viral wasn't just this controversy. But afterwards, many trans women found that despite the app's intentions to keep trans women out at this point, they were actually able to get on. While the bone structure AI did stop some trans women, it let many more on. The biological reality that the app was trying to filter for wasn't really a reality at all. So, in a way, this app became a quite literal pass-fail TERF check that required you just to take a selfie, so it became incredibly memeable. Yet, while all of this seems like an easy joke, I think the memification of Giggle, as memifications often do in our social media age, misses a lot of interesting context around this story. Because, as I said, if you didn't remember, Giggle did actually start off being trans-inclusive. So how did it and Sal fall so down the TERF pipeline? Giggle may seem easy to laugh at, I mean it's literally in the name, but the story of Giggle sits at an important intersection of AI, anti-trans rhetoric, capitalism, and cancel culture dynamics that all ultimately reveal how gender-critical ideology is a pipeline that is being used to not only target trans people, but ultimately uphold larger, more insidious values that reinforce traditionalist gender roles and a white supremacist worldview. So let's ask, how can someone like Sal Grover, who starts off affirming trans people, be radicalized into trans exclusivity, hatred, anger, and blatant self-interest? Now, before we talk about Giggle, and I also send you off to go kill the Power Rangers, let's first talk a little bit about algorithms. To access Giggle, users are asked first to take a selfie of themselves to be analyzed by the app's facial recognition software, which was created by Kerios, which is a company name that sounds straight out of Cyberpunk 2077. We care about you as an individual. That's why we try to distill everyone's features into easily digestible and marketable buckets, because we Kerios. I know, I hated myself too when I said it. Anyways, let's go to Giggle's website to see exactly what the app does with this selfie.
Through computer vision and deep learning, they recognize females in videos, photos, and the real world. In less than a second, the image is analyzed. The AI does this by comparing the image in question with thousands of other images. From this, it determines the likelihood of the subject being female at a stated confidence level based on the bank of past results. The information is received as a string, showing the percentage likelihood of the subject being either male or female. We have set the image confidence level at 95% for female.
So basically, all you have to do to be able to access the app is be 95% female. What that 95% is just determined by the algorithm. And I bet you're asking the question, what does that 95% female even mean? And don't worry, we will get there. But before we talk about how that 95% is determined, well, let's talk about what this app does. The basics of it goes that the app takes this image that you've uploaded and cross-checks it with thousands of other photos fed to Kerios' algorithm that says this is what a woman looks like. And if it determines if your picture looks 95% like those, if you do, it lets you into the app. But Kerios certainly was not infallible, even when it came to cisgender women. A 2019 study found that Kerios' AI misgendered darker-skinned cisgender women 22.5% of the time. So almost 1 in 4 women of color were seen as men by the app. The study even found other similar AIs like Amazon's did so at a rate of 31%. And these weren't even the most offensive stats, because if we move beyond simply recognizing gender, we can see a bigger issue. For example, Google's image recognition system labeled African Americans as gorillas instead of humans in 2015. Shouldn't have to explain why that one's pretty bad. Similarly though, AI systems like these can also misidentify trans people, whether they're a person of color or not. For example, transgender Uber drivers had their accounts suspended due to Uber's AI on the app not recognizing transgender people's faces during transition. And that's not even talking about determining a trans person's gender. That's just figuring out if we are who we say we are. I mean, this exact thing happened to me too recently. As many of you know, I got facial harmonization surgery recently, and my damn iPhone wouldn't fucking unlock because it used facial recognition software, and it didn't recognize my new, beautiful, sexy face. But it's okay. I still find you attractive. You do not want to know what I use the vibrate function for. Anyways, TMI. These AI biases have direct tangible effects beyond simply not letting me access my Twitter account so I can rant about the latest Star Trek Lower Decks episode. Uber's inability to recognize trans women led to a trans woman losing her job because she wasn't recognized by the app. That may seem easily correctable, and it was. That woman was able to get her job back after she was able to talk to Uber, but it does mean that she missed out on several days' work before she was able to get back to Ubering. This is a huge issue because many trans women and other minority groups, due to larger discriminations against us in society, often live paycheck to paycheck. So missing even a single paycheck is a huge issue, especially for someone who has to work for Uber. But there's also passive ways that algorithms affect our bottom line. Ticketing machines in Berlin used facial recognition software to give female riders discounts on International Women's Day in 2019. But these algorithms failed to provide that discount to many women of color. It's a small thing, it's just not getting a discount, but show how often costs are directly passed on to trans people and people of color, increasing the already heavier financial burdens that women in general, and especially people of color and especially trans people of color, due to numerous factors like increased healthcare costs, job discrimination, and the higher cost of living for women in general. And one AI researcher pointed out that this could ultimately lead to denying trans people the ability to access their own apartments. Considering these to be used for rent-stabilized apartments and trans people are often discriminated against in jobs, it is more likely that trans people will have to face an issue like this, and showcases how discriminations can compound onto each other, causing more and more issues for trans people and other marginalized groups, and how these systems can work together to continually disenfranchise people. And even when these situations are resolved, the time and energy burden is placed upon marginalized folks to rectify the situation rather than on those who caused it in the first place. That's if it can be corrected at all, not to mention the damage that happens before it is corrected. And these are all specific stories of how algorithms can affect the marginalized. But we could even talk about larger trends. There's zero shortage of stories of how AI biases can embolden predatory advertising, racism in hiring, racist criminal justice systems, and more, all burdens being placed upon marginalized people. For example, AIs are used in resume scanners in recruitment software, which are used to look for the best candidates for a job before they get to an actual human who then looks at all the resumes that the AI placed in front of them. And a study found that Black professionals were 30 to 50% less likely to get job callbacks when their resumes contained information about their racial or ethnic identity and an algorithm was used to look at them. And this was not a direct, hey, we don't want Black people at this company, but more because AI is not being programmed to recognize achievements or words related to racial topics. If you won an award from the NAACP, for example, the algorithm may not weight it equally or even see it as compared to a general award-winning scholarship. Now, it would be very easy to just blame the algorithms for these problems, but it all comes down to the biases in the way algorithms are taught. Let's say you want to teach a computer what a duck is. Well, in order to do that, you show it just tons of pictures of ducks, and eventually it'll try to recognize a picture of a duck based on the images that you sent it.
Duck.
It's like a child figuring out picture cards. But also, like a child, AIs can also learn the biases of those teaching them.
Look at all those chickens!
Most of the folks teaching and creating algorithms that are used in these ways are all from the tech industry, which is an industry that many studies have found mainly consists of straight and white cisgender men. One study, for example, found that just 12% of machine learning engineers are women. Many other advocates have also pointed out that there aren't a lot of people of color working in this field as well. And so when these people creating AIs try to teach their systems something like what a woman is, they will primarily pick pictures of their pre-existing biases of womanhood, what they directly think of when they think of women. And these often end up primarily being pictures of white, cisgender, stereotypically attractive images of women. Because that's what many straight cisgender men have been taught to think of when they think of the word woman.
So, what would you little maniacs like to do first?
They don't immediately think of adding a bunch of butch women, or trans women, or even black women immediately. This is compounded further that they're often using AIs to teach AIs that have also learned biases. For example, if you want to feed algorithms a picture of what a woman is, well, where do you get those pictures? You Google it. And guess what Google uses to make its image searches? And guess who built that algorithm? But this goes beyond simple internalized biases of the people who build the algorithms, because it also leads us to a deeper question. What are you teaching AI to filter for in order to categorize something as one thing or another? When you try to teach an algorithm what a duck is, what data points are you asking it to use to determine the duck? Is it the duck's shape? Is its color? Its overall size? Is it all those things in relationship to each other or independent of each other? All of this asks us to think about how we think of a duck. How do we as humans categorize it? And as we just discussed, there are always exceptions to how we categorize something, and those assumptions are often based on our own biases. But what if we taught an AI to filter based on data points that were based on irrelevant information? Like, what if we told an AI to categorize all ducks based on their love of jazz music? The AI would take this as written and pop out data on what is a duck or not based on this new data point, even if it's completely irrelevant to a duck. This is clearly an over-the-top cartoonish example, but we as humans have tried to use irrelevant data points to determine if someone's one thing or the other with AI, trying to determine if there's a correlation. Basically adding pseudoscience into AI algorithms. For example, a 2017 Stratford study created an algorithm that supposedly could determine if someone was gay based on their headshots. Headshots? Headshots. I meant headshots, based on their headshots. Beyond this, another AI tried to predict worker competency based on micro-expressions. Basically trying to tell what your face did and use that to determine how well you were working, which is something that feels like it's pulled straight from Squid Games. Another algorithm tried to determine someone's propensity for criminality based on facial features. And I wonder what type of person that AI biased towards being more criminal based on their facial features. Spoilers, it was black people. Even studying emotions were biased too, with AI shown to ascribe negative emotions to black people more often. All of these showcase attempts of trying to create pseudoscientific biases in algorithms, teaching them ways to explain attributes in a person in a way that is scientifically bunk. Let's use someone's nostril length to figure out if they're going to be a Trekkie or not. But this does finally bring us back to Giggle. Because remember how Giggle tried to determine if someone was a woman? Bone structure. It's bioscience, the not pseudoscience like phrenology, the website declares. It's always a good sign when your company FAQ page has to state, it's bioscience, we swear, it's not like that racist science. And the reason they have to do that though is because using someone's bone structure to determine anything may sound familiar to you, because it does reflect racist history. You've probably seen that scene from Django Unchained that meme that everyone uses of Leonardo DiCaprio is from.
The wigs involved.
Yeah, that one. We all know this one, we know the scene. If you have, in that case, you are familiar with phenology, a science, big air quotes there.
If I was holding the skull of an Isaac Newton or Galileo, these three dimples would be found in the area of the skull most associated with creativity. But this is the skull of old Ben. And in the skull of old Ben, unburdened by genius, these three dimples exist in the area of the skull most associated with civility.
Founded in the early 1800s by German physiologist Franz Joseph Gall, that sought to derive characteristic traits based on bone structure, ascribing things like bumps on the skull, which supposedly black people had less of, being used to argue that some people are just more intelligent, and these more intelligent people happen to be white, which was just a sheer coincidence that, the people that were pushing the science were also white. Around that same time that phenology became popular, the United States was struggling to justify slavery, as there was the currently growing abolitionist movement that would eventually lead to the Civil War in the United States. As a result, many tried to use phenology to justify slavery, such as physician Charles Caldwell, in an attempt to prove that African people were in their rightful place as slaves. Caldwell even concluded that based on the shape of an African person's skull, that made them suited to be slaves and that they were required to have a master. And this wasn't just used against black people for slavery, but against indigenous people as well. Samuel Morton, a US psychologist, wrote Crania America in 1839, which detailed skull configurations and, quote, mental capacities of 4 different, quote, separate species of humans, including indigenous people, arguing that they were literally different species of humans. President Andrew Jackson himself used this science to justify the removal of indigenous people from their land and the brutal treatment and genocide of them. But phenology wasn't just used when it came to race, but also was used for gender. Women were argued to have larger skulls in the back of their head, which led to underdeveloped organs necessary for success in the arts and sciences, while having larger mental organs relating to the care of children and religion, ultimately reinforcing women, and specifically white cisgender women's roles as being in the home caring for children. All of this flawed science had no actual basis in scientific evidence, but became popular because it was used to justify pre-existing biases that people already had, and used that to justify white supremacist ideals and institutions. The wonderful Khadija Mbowe did a great video on that history if you want to check it out. So when we try to apply this same type of pseudoscience to trans people, there's no wonder that it also has a lot of problems. Now, some studies have shown that there are some average bone structure differences between those who are assigned male at birth and those who are assigned female at birth in their skeletal structures. But the thing is, this isn't average. It's not universal. As my fellow YouTuber friend Mia Mulder pointed out in her video on trans women in sports, the issue becomes that even if we remove trans women from the equation when we talk about differences in bone structure between men and women, it's still not easy to determine a person's gender based on sole singular factors alone, such as bone structure. Many cisgender women are born with more prominent bones and sharper chins, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's someone's bones. You can't just say, well, all cisgender women have this bone structure, because that's not true. Well, Some people will say, and we'll talk about that in a second. But then this bias also gets compounded by other biases, because often the people that teach these AIs about bone structures are more likely to be the bone structures that appear more often in white cisgender women, excluding many women of color in this teaching. The usage of biology as some sort of essentialist way to classify people into clearly delineated buckets is ultimately a futile move. As writer Julia Serrano points out,
essentialism is the assumption that objects with a particular category, especially for those categories that are assumed to be natural, for example dogs, cats, humans, must share some kind of underlying essence with one another. For example, all dogs must share some underlying dogness that makes them similar to each other and distinct from all other animals. Children especially rely on essentialism in order to make sense of categories, and often essentialist beliefs remain with us well into adulthood. One can see essentialism rear its head when people presume that there must be essential differences between men and women, between homosexuals and heterosexuals, and between different races or ethnic groups.
But all this goes back to what I spoke about in my video on Matt Walsh's What is a Woman? These algorithms, as well as anti-trans folks, in the act of trying to define what a woman is, are expecting the word's definition to be preceded by some sort of reality, as if the word's definition itself is uncovering some truth within the world.
Our first concern is not fairness, it's not sports, it's not privacy, it's not even safety. Those are all concerns and they're important, but our primary motivation is to defend truth for its own sake.
Instead of recognizing that the word woman and womanhood itself is a human concept that is trying to define a very broad list of associated but not always linked or come together characteristics. As such, by trying to teach an algorithm what a woman is always going to inherently leave someone out, because you're trying to give borders to something that inherently does not have limited borders. And where you define those borders often come from cultural stigmas like transphobia and racism that the term woman itself was built out of. I spoke about in my aforementioned Matt Walsh video, as did the wonderful Lily Alexander in this video, but the entire history of womanhood as we think about it today in American culture and, broadly speaking, Western culture comes from colonializing nations' attempts to frame white, aristocratic, aka upper class womanhood as weak and in needing of protection from and in juxtaposition to the people these nations were colonized, who they also racialized at the same time. So white women were seen as weak, whereas black women were seen as beasts, less than human and deserving of being put into slavery and being colonized. Entire fake sciences were created to make a seeming legitimate basis for why black women and black people in general were less than, like phrenology. And since our whole idea of womanhood is based off of framing white women as weak and fragile, then any woman who is not that, be they black, trans, tall, butch, etc., is not really seen as a woman in our current cultural definitions. It's why in my Matt Walsh video I pointed out how Matt Walsh, and by extension a lot of anti-trans rhetoric, view of woman is not just biological reality, but also one who is seen as needing to be in the home, taking care of children, and be protected by strong men. And it's also why black women, trans women, and more are seen as predators and dangerous. And why when you create an app that tries to determine what a woman is based on the same pseudo-scientific bunk nonsense that was used to justify these categorizations in the first place, you'll end up not just with a transphobic app, but a racist one. Because it all goes back to colonialization. But that's the thing with AI. You see, the biases and problems inherent in algorithmic recognition technology aren't because computers are inherently discriminatory, they learn it because we are the ones teaching it to our computers. Algorithms don't learn context that human beings and biases exist within. They just learn the biases that we teach it to regardless of the context. Giggle's algorithm is a mathematical distillation of history and human tendencies to deny someone's identity made into a pass-fail selfie test. But this all brings us back to our situation with Giggle, which underscores everything that we've been talking about, as the Giggle situation directly highlights the connection between gender and racism and how these type of pseudoscientific biases that we program into our algorithms are ultimately all there to uphold a white supremacist hierarchy. As previously mentioned, Giggle's AI denied access not only to many trans women, but to many women of color as well, with the AI categorizing them both as men. It's quite literally misgendering someone. Now, many of us understand the problem of misgendering when it comes to trans people. It's kind of a thing that we've been talking about for a while. For many out trans people like myself who have been out for a long time, being misgendered casually here and there on accident by somebody isn't really much of a bother. It bothers me here and there. It means that I'm not being seen by the person that I'm interacting with, but, you know, especially when the person's intention was to be kind with me, it's ultimately not a big deal. But for younger trans people who aren't as confident in their identity, it can be a big fucking deal to be misgendered. It can cause a lot of distress. And even more importantly, if the misgendering is being done intentionally by someone with malicious intent, that can be even more hurtful and harmful. All of this is even more so compounded for trans people who aren't even out yet and don't have affirming communities around them. It can make them feel like their identities are not real or they are mentally ill for many different reasons. But while we understand misgendering for trans people, this misgendering concept also has a long history when applied to women of color and especially black women in the United States. There is a long history of black women being denied access to their womanhood based on their race. I spoke about this at greater length in this video, but for example, during the suffragette movement in the United States, many white suffragettes denied many black women into the movement because they saw black women as a threat to a white woman's right to vote. Black women were often seen as masculinized or less than human, seen as not really women. They would also be hypersexualized, like with the Jezebel trope, made to seem alluring, seductive, predatory, and dangerous. And all that sounds very familiar to me as a transgender person, who is quite often seen as more masculine just based on who I am, or seen as predatory and hypersexualized just by the mere identity that I have. Just like trans women, black women were, and still are, denied access to womanhood in order to dehumanize them, to push them out from certain spaces like women's spaces like feminist movements and other areas around the world. And there's a long history of the same thing happening to any woman who falls outside what we would consider the stereotypical traditionalist view of womanhood. White, straight, thin, conventionally beautiful with interest in all things pink and feminine. Fat women are told that they're not real women. Women interested in gaming are seen as lying about their interests. Or hypersexualized, saying like, oh, I want to get the gamer girl. Hell, women who don't use makeup are told all the time that they aren't worthy of being seen. Misgendering isn't a problem just because trans people are discussing it recently. Denying someone access to their gender is baked into how we discriminate against someone. It is part of it. It's why when we talk about the way trans people are discriminated against, it's just the current most visible way that these tactics have been used to press people into certain views of gender and specifically womanhood for centuries. Everything that I've been talking about with people of color has been wielded against trans people as well. I can't tell you how many messages I've received from trans folks saying, well, when you die thousands of years from now, people will know your real gender based on your bones, which ignores how many anthropologists studying bones learn about how societies actually function. Anthropologists don't go, oh, look at this person's bone structures. This was definitely a girl in this society, and we all know what girls did. Ha ha ha! Job done. They study and say, who was this person in this society? What did they do? How did they exist? And how did their biological features play a role in how they were seen in their society?
You can see a kind of saddle-shaped depression over the top of the skull, and then at the back underneath you've got a counterpart. It's interesting because his father, Akhenaten, had a skull shape like that, and Akhenaten was married to Nefertiti, and it seems that she had this kind of head shape, and they had 6 daughters. All 6 daughters had head shapes like that.
What I've seen is that there is no written evidence or record of like this happening for people in royal positions or higher society like King Tut. Why do you think there wouldn't be a record of this?
I think this was done in secret. This was not something that was to be public knowledge. The whole idea was to take a small group of people and artificially change their head shape so that they would look different from everybody else. And it kind of spoils the effect if you tell everybody what you're doing.
Yet you see this essentializing of bone structures or stereotypically feminine features ascribed to certain biological sex characteristics throughout all of anti-trans rhetoric. To the point where you'll see many gender-critical feminists say that they see a trans woman in a picture because they see broad shoulders or a chiseled jaw, when they're actually being shown a picture of Sigourney Weaver. All of this showcases how policing of womanhood, be it trans people or people of color's womanhood or anyone else's, often itself is an outgrowth of policing standards of femininity that are often typically centralized on upper-class, white, stereotypically feminine womanhood. And if Sigourney Weaver can't even meet that standard, then the rest of us are fucked. Even more so, as I mentioned, I recently had facial harmonization surgery. Literally, my bone structure is more what we would consider to be stereotypically feminine today. I am now more likely to be able to get into the Giggle app because of my bones.
How do you know?
I feel it in my bones.
So am I now more officially a woman because I have my bones shaved down? No. I'm still just as much of a woman as I was before the surgery. In that, I'm still a woman. Yet many would say that my bone structure now is lying, as if there's some morality inherent in my bones being a certain way or another. Again, applying a moral virtue to one's unmodified body. See Abigail Thorne's wonderful video on transhumanism for more on that concept and how people ascribe a certain sense of moral certitude to one's unaltered body, as if it describes some truth from on high. While society has a more complex version that intersects in numerous disparate ways and is more manipulated more actively, it often comes down to the same sort of pass-fail mentality of who gets to access womanhood in our world. Giggle's AI is just doing the same thing that many of us that have a bias in our society do in the same way. The act of deciding what a woman is often comes down to the same sort of pass-fail mentality of who gets access to womanhood or not in our world. As AI ethics researcher Dr. Eleanor Dragh said in her book Philosophy and Technology,
by claiming that racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination can be stripped away from artificial intelligence, it reduces race and gender down to insignificant data points, rather than systems of power that shape how we move through the world.
Yet, like Phrenology before it, algorithm learning gives this veneer of objectivity to these hierarchical systems and power imbalances. By saying that an AI managed to find some correlation between being a gay man and one's facial features, it's subtly trying to say that there's some scientific basis for that, when you're just teaching AI algorithms to categorize based on biased factors. Based on our interaction of what information we feed these algorithms, as well as who gets to determine these algorithms in the first place.
Industry practitioners developing AI technologies must shift from trying to correct individualized instances of bias to considering the broader inequalities that shape recruitment processes. This requires abandoning the veneer of objectivity that is grafted onto AI systems, so that technologists can better understand their implication, and that of the corporations within which they work.
Yet sadly, also like Phrenology before it, given that these algorithms have the veneer of scientific objectivity to them, they are also still ultimately used to justify systems that benefit whiteness and cisgenderism. We already see algorithms being used to further clamp down on protests for racial justice or policing black communities, which we saw very obviously during the George Floyd riots just a few years ago. In the same way, an AI startup told CNN Business that it could offer gender prediction systems to help security guards flag men in an all-female dormitory. And this led to trans women being policed access to be able to use women's spaces like bathrooms, which underscores already ongoing anti-trans legislation that tried to keep trans people from going to specific bathrooms in certain states. And this isn't even to mention privacy issues, like how a computer scientist at the University of North Carolina used images of trans people online to teach its AI to recognize trans people without asking the trans people if it was okay to use their images to teach its AI. Algorithms also used by the police are more likely to target black neighborhoods as areas to be further policed and patrolled, leading to further policing of these communities and thereby greater increase of police violence used against these communities. Now, I hear a lot of you saying, well, yeah, that's bad, of course, but that's fixable. We just teach these systems how to do better and show them more pictures of more diverse women. Now, certainly this answer ignores the harm that was caused by these algorithms already and is still being caused, but at least it's forward thinking. But then the question becomes, who gets to determine how to fix the problem? Sure, pressure from the outside helps, weird trans women on the internet ranting about it, but with the tech industry still very clearly slanted in who gets hired and works within it, which is often itself informed by AI, by the way, this means that more often than not, they won't have a woman of color, a trans person, or someone else in the room when they make these decisions. Because while someone may feel like they wish to try to teach their AI to better recognize black women, for example, they may still find themselves biasing towards skinny, more stereotypically beautiful, light-skinned black women, leaving women who fit outside of that, who may be fatter or darker skinned or have different bone structure, which would be most, still don't get recognized. With many trans women, these people may think of Caitlyn Jenner, a trans woman with endless amount of money and privilege to be able to get access to the clothing, medical care, and makeup to make her appearance exactly the way that she wants, something that most trans people don't have access to. Many trans people don't have the amount of money to look as stereotypically feminine as Caitlyn Jenner does, nor do many of us even wish to. And again, this then feeds the system itself because it then feeds biased AI algorithmic hiring practices, which then determine who gets hired to build these systems again. As the co-founder of advocacy group Black in AI, Timnit Gebru, said,
"The reason diversity is really important in AI, not just in datasets but also in researchers, is that you need people who just have this social sense of how things are. We are in a diversity crisis for AI. In addition to having technical conversations about law, conversations about ethics, we need to have conversations about diversity in AI. We need all sorts of diversity in AI, and this needs to be treated as something that's extremely urgent."
Even beyond that, even if you do hire a black woman or a trans woman, then you've now created the problem where one person has to speak for an entire community, and many communities have their own internalized biases. Even beyond that, given the fact that AIs are used to uphold white supremacist systems, there are many people who wouldn't want to make AIs better at detecting certain groups of people. As writer Zoe Scamuzzi wrote,
"In a country where crime prevention already associates blackness with inherent criminality, why would we fight to make our faces more legible to a system designed to police us? It is not social progress to make black people equally visible to software that will inevitably be further weaponized against us."
We could even talk about this in a transgender and LGBTQ context, like those AI algorithms that we talked about before that could potentially detect a trans person. Like, you know, libs of TikTok or transvestigator conspiracy theorists would love the crap out of an algorithm like this used to detect supposed trans people. This AI could then be used to out transgender people or even misidentify someone as trans, thereby setting them up for possible harassment, and why when you create an app that tries to determine what a woman is based on the same pseudo-scientific bunk nonsense that was used to justify these categorizations in the first place, you'll end up not just with a transphobic app, but a racist one, because it all goes back to colonialization. Giggle's AI is just doing the same thing that many of us that have a bias in our society do in the same way. Thus, if Giggle actually does want to just be a women's only space, the only best way for them to be able to decide who to let into their female only space is to let them self-identify with it. And this self-ID could have been the way that Giggle went. They could have gone, yeah, this whole algorithm thing is kind of bullshit, isn't it? And well, yeah, let's just let people choose to come in and tell us if they're women, and we'll believe them. Except, sadly, that's not what happened. Instead, Sal Grover went in a completely different direction. One that she was guided along as she fell down a radicalization pipeline that reflected the very impulses that led her to create Giggle in the first place. So let's talk about Sal Grover. But before we dive into the story of a single person, I want to remind you all that, like how I discuss most stories of single people in discussions of issues concerning transphobia, race, gender, and more, I'm doing this not to take out this one person to attack them, call them out, or hate on them. While Grover has many issues that we will get into and many problems, I'm discussing them because she is an excellent example of why white cisgender women are often radicalized into ideologies deeply ingrained in harm, like the gender critical movement. I examine her story to highlight a consistent problem and experience because it is an overt example. Not to individualize this story as evidence of the problem of this one woman, but to place it into stark relief how it often happens universally. This is not a problem of just one woman, but a story of a single woman that shows us a greater problem. Sal Grover, before founding Giggle, initially lived in Hollywood, working as a screenwriter. I tried to find some of the scripts that she worked on, but sadly, IMDb doesn't list much. The only thing I could see she worked on were projects called Sex on the First Date and another one called Brunch, which are like, and I say this as a white woman, the most white woman titles for movies I have ever seen in my life. Regardless, I'm not judging, my IMDb page is just as sparse. My most recent credit is as tweet reader for a Council of Geeks video, which is a role that I cherish. What is to be gained with the gender swap? The same argument you did here can be there. Plus, it is agenda, and not story-driven. Like many women, Grover probably went to Hollywood with the American dream of becoming a famous screenwriter. Again, I'm not judging, I did it too. And as someone who worked in Hollywood for many years, I can say it is a very isolating place, where you often can work hard for the promise of getting head and never actually make it. It's a place where it's hard to make friends and connect with people outside of networking opportunities. Everyone becomes a potential business acquaintance and less of a friend. And even then, it can be hard to get ahead. I know dozens of talented screenwriter friends who are incredibly amazing at their craft and even have agents and sadly still don't have credits to their name. it can be a really rough go, especially for women, given all the biases, the stigmas that many women have to face entering into Hollywood, as we saw with the #MeToo movement. And this is something that Grover began to recognize around the time of the Me Too movement. As she stated in an interview,
I was so isolated in Hollywood, where Me Too situations were happening all too regularly, that I moved to New York to escape it.
this is sadly an all too common tale. I can speak from personal experience. I won't go into detail, but I can say that Hollywood is rife with abuses, and I've seen it happen very personally. And as the aforementioned Me Too movement and the crimes of folks like Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, and many more showcase, the abuse of women is all too common in these spaces. Not to mention the horror traumas inflicted upon many working women in Hollywood. And not to say how women daily are harassed in any field. A Writers Guild of America study found that 79% of women in Hollywood experience discrimination, bullying, and/or harassment based on their gender. In big and small ways, Hollywood deeply discriminates against women, and contributes to the brain drain of Hollywood that Grover's departure from the city, and my own, are examples of. In her own words,
I was there for almost 10 years. I experienced sexual abuse, assault, and harassment. To cut a long and painful story short, I had to return to Australia because my mental health was essentially non-existent. I'd lost the ability to write. Through therapy, I discovered that this was self-preservation, as writing led me into rooms where the abuse, assault, and harassment would happen.
So, Sal, isolated and sadly awakened to the abuse and harms inflicted upon women because they are women, eventually moved to New York, where she was inspired to create Giggle.
I lived with 3 absolutely amazing girls who reminded me of how much better life is when girls are in it. I then went back to Australia, and a conversation with my mom about how all girls should experience the joy I had in NYC became the first day of the Giggle idea.
Sal found what I think is essential for everyone to find: community. Finding community with groups of people who understand your experience, especially after being so isolated, can be profoundly empowering. It's why we talk about the power of queer people's found family, or the power of collective action. It's about finding solidarity with folks like you, who may face common struggles or discrimination, or also understand that cyberpunk aesthetic is awesome. For example, queer folks often find ourselves, especially early in our coming out, deeply isolated from others, and find strength in community with people like ourselves, something that Grover found with other women in New York City as well. However, I think it's important to recognize the type of friendship circles that Grover herself tended to idolize. When asked what her favorite types of representations of groups of women were, her sheroes, as the interviewer asked, Grover stated,
Sex and the City was a big part of my journey into adulthood, but I can also list Destiny's Child, the First Wives Club, The Real Housewives, The Women of the Supreme Court, and The Squad.
I don't think I could have come up with a more girl boss list of inspirations than that. As something like Sex and the City showcases, that whole list is like this very hegemonic, privileged, and white view of female friendship.
We adore each other, we have fun together, we mesh. And this is a problem? No, it feels odd. You know, I'm used to the hunt, and this is effortless. It's freaking me out.
Which the wonderful Princess Weeks discussed in her video on Sex and the City. Now, I don't want to discount Destiny's Child or political figures like AOC or Chief Justice Sonia Sotomayor, their accomplishments nor their importance to their communities, or the struggles all of them faced in achieving what they did. Still, these women have often been highlighted in this neoliberal versions of blackness that white culture often latches onto, because these versions of blackness have been commodified for our consumption. These forms of blackness don't confront the inherent systemic injustices in our system.
And while much of the focus of this essay is on the black community, it's important to note that this isn't just exclusive to the black community, but how we racialize in the United States many different cultures.
Chief Justice Sonia Sotomayor, for example, is often heralded for her individual achievement, not community achievement. Hey, look, these people can find success. It individualizes achievements in feminism that were beating the system to individual successes that ultimately isn't about solidarity. As Ko Beck puts it,
white feminism as an ideology and a very specific approach and strategy toward achieving gender equality that focuses more on individual accumulation, capital, and individuality, accruing power without any redistribution or reconsideration of it. And that's why white feminism overlaps with white supremacy and classism and transphobia, because there's no analysis of that power and it's very singular in its execution and goals.
Basically, this idea of white feminism is ultimately about how women realize they are victims of the patriarchy, but don't don't recognize it as a systemic issue, but instead see individual women succeeding in a system that harms women as the end goal. They don't wish to destroy the power structures that harm everyone, but just manage to make themselves as individuals be able to have power within the pre-existing systems. And they view their success as women simply through their ability to overcome sexism, rather than realizing that they only help themselves, not others, and how potentially their privileges as white women and people of upper class backgrounds have allowed them opportunities to navigate these spaces and structures more easily than someone from a lower class background or a person of color or a trans person would. It's a version of femininity that ignores whiteness and centers the fight against sexism, without recognizing how this fight intersects with other issues that women of color, trans folks, or queer folks might face. The way you can tell how girl boss feminism works is that Sal is not trying to tear down the institutions and systems that oppress everyone around her, even herself, but just wishes to place herself at the top of these hierarchies so that she specifically, and maybe a few other white women like her, can be safe, but ultimately not here to truly tear down the system or make things better for anyone else. We can see this quite evidently with Giggle itself. So here we have a woman like Sal Grover who idolizes these types of girl boss white feminist worldviews, one where she understands sexism and the struggle against it, but saw the way to beat it as working up the rungs in capitalism. And she did what any good girl boss capitalist would do. She founded an app company and made Giggle, giving it the most stereotypically girly name imaginable. And as we already spoke about, her app reflects that sort of white feminist mindset. Her AI algorithm facial features app gatekept trans women, women of color, and more from entering into it, even though she did understand and not wish to exclude these identities. And this exclusion of trans women and women of color from the app were both acknowledged to be an issue by Grover herself back when Giggle was explicitly open to trans people. When the app launched in 2020, Giggle's site stated,
Giggle is for all girls, but due to the gender verification software that Giggle uses, trans girls will experience trouble with being verified.
She saw it as something that was external to herself. And this is something that white feminists often do, as Lisa Govna and Tillman Smith spoke about in their excellent book, What's Up with White Women.
While beginning to understand we, white women, are harmed by sexism, white women in this stage feel even less agency when it comes to addressing racism. Empathy for people of color takes a back seat to the immediate sting we often feel from sexism. We generally disregard our own white privilege as a myth. As a result, we often replicate white patriarchal systems in an effort to counter sexism. Although we may notice disadvantages people of color have, we attribute institution barriers to individual failures. We'd say, those poor Latinx families are so hardworking, they just don't have time to help their children in school. White women won't acknowledge that institutional racism and stereotypes creates barriers for people of color in accessing the educational system, or our own unearned advantages as white people that have helped us advance in these same systems. This holds true to all institutions. We support assimilation to the dominant culture's norms and values. The legacy of institutional racism has made it possible for most white women to grow up in the United States without having many, if any, friendships and social interactions with people of color. This means most white women do not have personal relationships that might give us any alternative insights on the effects of racism. Instead, we keep our sense of entitlement to privilege and our awareness of sexism we experience at the center of our realities.
Doesn't that exact description fit Sal Grover perfectly? Centering only sexism, she created a little app, which she was primed to find startup money for as someone with access in a capitalist world. And this app quite literally centered on sexism and white friendships, and while acknowledging people of color or trans people may find struggle, refused to recognize that her app quite literally gatekept womanhood through the systemic issues inherent in how we build algorithms, which reflect cultural worldviews on how we gatekeep womanhood in general anyways. By centering her white womanhood, Grover failed to understand how, despite her intent to include trans people and women of color, she was adding a barrier to their time, misgendering them, and increasing discrimination. Further, her app at the start of it also sorted trans women into a gender identity category, which was separate from the biological women category in the app. So, you know, it was just a separate but equal section.
And this is an important moment to highlight that I've been talking a lot about Sal Grover in terms of race, because I want to point to the connection between racism and its colonialist history, as well as gender and its colonial history as well, and how it all stems out of racism and attempting to justify colonialization. However, it's also important to recognize how this goes along with transness. Because we see gender as something that is essentialist in our biology, then we can sort of take it as natural and normal, and thereby anyone who argues against this this idea that we can take as a given in our society is someone who is denying biological reality or denying some form of reality, as Sal will often argue, and many TERFs will often argue as well.
And so when women are saying this is the reality of the situation, you have people like, let's say it, like Owen Jones will just immediately call us anti-trans. And it's like, we're not anti-trans, we're just pro-reality. That's all.
You can hear the same sort of rhetoric when you hear people like Matt Walsh arguing that trans people are denying, quote, the truth of nature.
Male gametes. That's what makes me male.
No, your sperm don't make you male.
Then what does?
It's a constellation.
In reality, in truth, okay?
Whose truth are we talking about?
The same truth that says we're sitting in this room right now, you and I.
This is why Sal cannot ultimately recognize transness as its own legitimate category, because it would go against her understanding of gender being this innate thing within us. Thus, to recognize transness inherently means that Sal would have to recognize that gender itself is a construct that was made out of colonialization that she is perpetuating.
If gender exists as a structure imposed onto its subjects, what does it mean to change genders while remaining subjected to that structure? Many liberal trans-affirmative arguments have relied on essentialism, biological or otherwise, to justify the validity of trans identity. But if trans identification is not determined by your biology, neither is it an uncomplicated product of early socialization. Transgender identification is not inherent, or even necessarily constant. Instead, trans identities are formed responsive to their social context.
And what happens next is also entirely predictable, because, as I said at the top of this video, Grover was called out for these exact problems with her app. Her app was described as transphobic and racist, which it was. Yet, that wasn't the only part of what was predictable. But so too was Sal's reaction, because Sal was confronted with the reality of racism that she perpetuated, but understandably didn't intend. She didn't intend to make a racist app. She didn't set out to be like, fuck black people, at least I don't think so, but it was something that she was blind to and either was ignorant of or actively ignored.
And this is the intention of white supremacy, to make these things seem invisible by giving them some sort of scientific legitimacy or make them seem natural and normal parts of our society. It goes back to what I was talking about with Phrenology, how those scientific bases were there to justify and make seem natural certain hierarchies within our society. And because our society is built up on these assumptions that are taken as normal and made invisible, many white women who don't have to interact with it on a day-to-day basis aren't actively aware of it until they are confronted with it.
But now, regardless of whether she actively ignored them or were ignorant of them, she now was made to look at them and her complicity in perpetuating them.
White women also awaken to the reality of racism, but we're not really sure how or what to do and may lash out in our frustration. Because we are actively fighting the weight of sexist oppression, we frequently find it difficult to acknowledge any unearned privileges from white privilege. To admit we behave in racist ways, make racist assumptions, even unconsciously, or benefit from white privilege feels like it would undermine all our hard work as women. Instead, we vehemently defend our behaviors when we are called on our racism. After all, we are strong, powerful women who have battled extremely hard to get ahead. Don't you see that?
We're having this national conversation about sexual assault and women having a voice. I've been calling out to everyone, going, hi, I'm a woman with a voice, and I get knocked down, I get blocked by certain journalists. So it's very much this attitude of like, women have a voice, oh, not you, you sit down.
Yeah, as is sadly the case, instead of recognizing what she was contributing to, Sal instead doubled down and ignored the criticism, saying she was being attacked for being a woman, instead of being honestly criticized for her problems in her app. And this is something that often happens when women of privilege, especially white women, face an existential crisis when we have to confront our racism. This is something that I myself have faced, even as a trans white woman. I live in a system that perpetuates racism, and as a result, there are times where I perpetuate it too, often unwillingly or unknowingly, but I do. For example, early in my YouTube career, I made a video where I joked about a black person's name, saying that I couldn't pronounce it. Well, I thought this was funny because haha, I can't pronounce a person's name was actually me dehumanizing a black person because I, with my Western culture background, didn't have to learn how to pronounce his name. It's a very similar concept to misgendering. and one that a lot of white people often do. As a result, people reached out to me at that time and told me that this was a problem and that I should change it. And when you're criticized for perpetuating something, there are two things you can do. The first of which is acknowledge the problem, take accountability, and work to rectify it. And it's what I try to do. And it's something that I'm constantly trying to be vigilant about, but know that I'm not perfect with, but always try to be held accountable for if I do screw up. But the second thing you can do is double down on the mistake, thinking, well, I'm a good person, how can they think I would do something so harmful? Without realizing that quite often, perpetuating racism is not an actively conscious thing, but one born out of ignorance, at least often initially. So when you go down that route, as with Sal, you make it in your head that these criticisms are wrong. And then, by doing so, you have to justify why these people are making these critiques. Why are they coming after you? Because if they're wrong, they have to have a reason, right? And since you're used to facing victimization from your womanhood, well then it must be because you're a woman. It's misogyny. These people are coming after you because you're a woman. That's why you're being criticized. And boy, did Sal go with that narrative.
TERF's just the new version of bitch, slut, or any of that.
Giggle is an app for women to connect for finding roommates, freelance work, connecting for emotional support, or having just a voice and sharing their opinion online without the misogynistic abuse that's found online that you know all too well about.
And it's a female feed / forum. It works both ways, where you can have a public voice and sort of post your opinions and interact in a public forum without the misogynistic abuse and censorship that is found on other public feeds and forums.
Abused send death threats, rape threats, general abuse, silenced by so many people. I mean, I'm so grateful for you giving me an opportunity to speak.
Instead of taking accountability, Sal used the cancel culture narrative. I did a whole video on this, but cancel culture is inherently a cynical right-wing narrative that removes people from facing accountability for their actions. Even further, when we do these cancel culture narratives, when we focus on an individual being attacked by people who are rightfully criticizing them, it stops the discussion of the systemic problems represented by the issue at hand. For example, the discussion has become less about the app and the problems inherent with the algorithm and makes it all about Sal. But the issue never was Sal as a person at the start of this. It was about the problems that could have been addressed with her app. But instead, criticism of the app became about her. She was unable to take away criticism of racism without it being personal, so it never got addressed. As a result, the systemic issues that she was perpetuating keep getting perpetuated.
And actually, interestingly, a weird event that occurred with this video itself, the one that you're currently watching, actually proves this point that I'm making in real time. A previous version of this video essay that you're currently watching actually went live for a couple hours a week early, but I had to take it down for nothing to do with this essay itself, but the announcement that's at the end of this video that, by the way, you should totally stick around for. But during the few hours that the old version of the video was live on YouTube, Sal Grover herself took notice and decided to tweet out about it.
Men who claim to be women retaliate against women who say they are not by calling us, quote, transphobic, quote, racist, and, quote, white supremacist. It's abhorrent behavior. Quote, Jessie Gender released a 90-minute video making these claims about me today. And yet, still, at no time are men women.
And I find this tweet that Sal made around this very video rather interesting, because Sal writes as if I called her an active racist or white supremacist within this very video. I would hope that those of you who are currently watching this are well aware that I've made very clear as you've watched this so far that I've not actually done any of those things. What I have done is spoken about how she, through her actions, contributed to systemic harm to people of color and trans people within our society that itself is built upon white supremacist systems. Yet, Sal took this discussion and this video as a personal attack by me on her and her character instead of what I actually have been saying, that we live in a society that directly pushes all of us to benefit from these systems that harm everyone, but specifically people of color, trans people, and women generally, along with many others. She instead makes the criticism about herself as if I'm attacking her personally, when the point I'm making is that the system is entirely predictable and we all contribute to it, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. Yet, she also articulates the next step that I'm going to be discussing by ending all this by reiterating that trans women are not women and specifically implying that I am a man, thereby doubling down on her transphobia. So instead of listening to the critique that I and many others have made about her and the system that she is contributing to, even unconsciously, she rejects that introspection that she could do and take to understand that even though she may not have intended harm, she still could contribute to it, and instead uses it as a chance to claim it's because trans women, who are just actually men, are attacking her for being a woman. Instead of doing the self-analysis that earnest criticism could cause her to do, she instead resolves this cognitive dissonance by not placing the blame upon herself, but blaming trans people generally, and saying that everyone who's coming after her is just sexist and calling her a white supremacist, making it about herself instead of the issues that we could actually be talking about in a larger, more systemic way that she is a part of, but by no means an isolated incident within. I find it very funny because this tweet literally just distills everything that I was talking about with Sal in this video, in a tweet that she did about this very video. It showcases quite literally how powerful cognitive dissonance is and how people will continually refuse to do self-analysis because our society doesn't encourage you to do so, but instead encourages you in a way that continues to get you attention and profits.
Also, at the same time, when people talk about trans people or people of color's existences, we aren't allowed to take that personally, because it's just a difference of opinion.
So the idea that suicidality is directly a result of people like me saying, no, men are not women and women are not men, it's not true. It's also...
So you think it doesn't impact their identity at all, or their depression, or how they feel about themselves?
I think the idea that you're going to sacrifice the entire society's proper definition of sex because you think that there is in legal terms, somebody with an eggshell skull, meaning that somebody who has a pre-existing condition that makes them more susceptible to criticism, that is not a way to run a society. You can't sacrifice truth because some people are going to actually suffer because of the truth.
And cancel culture narratives feed off the ability to take the most heightened version of a criticism of someone and say, like, this is what everyone is saying about me, instead of recognizing that there are valid criticisms to be had. We live in a world where everyone can point to the most vehement attack against someone, which is often heightened because social media often showcases the most heightened voices, and say they're being harassed and attacked, instead of acknowledging that good faith criticism that's being had. Instead of listening to said criticism, people can say they're being canceled and wield this culture war to have more niche audiences become defensive of them and ignore and attack critics and then sell their product, as Sal has always tried to do. People like Sal say they're being silenced, so naturally this gets them on as many microphones as they want, from TV shows to Glinner's personal YouTube channel, which, as we know, is the height of entertainment.
I do miss funny jokes. They were nice when they happened.
I guess I'm really excited about Giggle Talk when we launch it. It could be a place where like a girl can just go and tell a joke and have people read it and not pile on her about it. I think that's probably the thing I'm the most excited about, or just or not lose a job over it.
Yeah. Well, that would be an improvement. Let's put it that way.
Sal also said that she was being called a TERF.
I was like, what the hell is happening? And we were getting all of these like 1-star reviews saying you're transphobic and you're a TERF, and I'm going. One, I was like, what the hell is a TERF? So I'm a huge fan of this person. I'm excited to see what they say. Called me a TERF and blocked me.
One of the things that is the most difficult to deal with when you are female is the women who are on the side of these activists, who will call up women TERFs.
I mean, well, TERF's just the new version of bitch, slut, whore, any of that.
Her algorithm quite literally did TERFy things, excluding trans women in the same way that TERFs do. It was built off of these same TERF assumptions. And as a result, the TERF community came to rally beside her.
I'm the co-president of the Cambridge Radical Feminist Network, and I'm here today to speak to the wonderful Sal Grover.
TERFs are also often privileged white women who find insular communities in places like Mumsnet and other online spaces, which the wonderful Kaylee and Conrad focused on in their excellent series about how TERFs radicalize in online spaces. These groups center whiteness and womanhood as the center of attention, centering white women's concerns as the end-all be-all of white womanhood, and any victory for white women as the end-all be-all victory for womanhood in general. This often happens in many white feminist spaces, as writer Ruby Hamad points out.
I watched as, once again, white women triumphantly transformed what was a personal victory for them into a supposed win for all women. More and more, I was wondering whether most, if not all, white feminists, which does not mean any feminist who is white, but refers to feminists who prioritize the concerns of white middle-class women as though they are representative of all women, are even listening to women of color when we say we experience race and gender simultaneously, rather than as distinct and separate impositions.
Sal Grover, white feminists in general, and TERFs often equate all womanhood with their privileged version of femininity, as Sal does in this clip.
So that's been an interesting journey because I am very much like a left-leaning liberal myself, and I was I've watched everything sort of through that's happened over the last few years, sort of through that position, and then experiencing what I think is a way to be a misogynist but called a hero. That's been my experience with it. That if you you can say anything you want to a woman right now, so long as you use the word TERF.
See how in that clip Sal is equating TERFdom with womanhood? She sees them as the same thing. These versions of womanhood and the actions that she does in name of it are the same thing as all womanhood. And we also saw all this doubling down in how Sal went around with her app. She changed her policy to one that was actively anti-transgender and fell increasingly into the TERF radicalization pipeline.
Is it open to people, to let's say men who identify as female?
I know. Well, are they female? I mean, are they biologically female?
What about my human rights of like free thought? And my part of it, the whole thing has been, I have the human right to identify a male when I see one. And I'm not giving that up. And that's what it comes down to for me, for female spaces in general.
She even began to use Margaret Atwood and The Handmaid's Tale as a selling point in the app's marketing, as we can see in these images. If you don't know why this is somewhat telling, TERFs and white feminists love The Handmaid's Tale because they see it as a terrifying vision of a possible future for them, the horrors of it, without realizing that The Handmaid's Tale itself is all based out of things that actually happen to many women around the world, as well as queer people and trans people and women of color in the United States.
The violence imposed on women's bodies in Atwood's dystopia has already been visited upon the bodies of Black and Indigenous women many times over. Atwood herself has revealed that she researched and only included injustice that women have already suffered. So though the storyline is fictional, the peculiarities of the misogynist violence are very real. Does misogynistic violence really not count until it is inflicted on the body of a white woman?
This is how often TERFs reinforce white supremacy and patriarchal systems without realizing it, at least at first. They reaffirm upper-class white womanhood as the only acceptable version of womanhood and highlight why gender norms were created in the first place, often to dehumanize any other type of woman. Go back to our discussion on the colonialization origins of the idea of womanhood. All of this reinforces traditionalist womanhood roles, even down to things like Giggle being plastered in pink. This conflating of white cisgender women's privileged place also marries how those of economic means often view poor people. Studies show that many with money, even those, and in fact especially those born into it, view being poor as a moral failing. That it's a choice to be poor, apparently. They can just pull yourselves up by your bootstraps, and that people are just lazy or not working hard enough if they are poor, without recognizing all the societal impacts that keep poor people poor, and how often that also intersects with things like race, gender, sexuality, one being trans or not, being queer or not, and more. And you can see how that all nicely maps into this worldview that we've been talking about. To them, being poor is a choice, and being trans is a choice. It's not racist to notice that Black people are poor, it's their fault. And you're being sexist if you call me out on that. It's why TERFdom fits so well within capitalistic patriarchal worldviews, and why conservative groups often work to fund and support many TERFs. Because it's propping up white women who need the help of the strong capitalist man to help fight back against those pesky transes and people of color who are hurting them. Again, we must protect the white woman from these different marginalized groups. The same narrative that we saw back in colonialization eras. In the end, Sal Grover is doing what her own AI and algorithm did, reinforcing some versions of womanhood and denying others, and thereby policing access to being seen as fully human, all done in order to prop up her power and place in a system that still devalues her. It's the same system that she tried to flee from in Hollywood, except this time she got to be the one enabling sexism instead of the one directly facing it. She just got to be on the other side of the curtain. Instead of being an actor in this play, now she's just writing it. So maybe she did get to live out her dream of being a screenwriter after all. The attempt to define simply what a woman is inherently an oppressive one. The idea of woman inherently comes out of oppression and colonialist forces trying to dominate different groups. Colonialist and capitalist forces often try to think of identity as prescriptive, as if the word somehow brings into reality what a person is, placing borders on who that person can become so that their identities can be commodified and sold so that people can easily understand someone. But in reality, words and definitions of identities are just loose terms that are trying to define people who inherently don't exist within these predefined borders. But to think of these borders as something rigid and needing to come out of some inherent truth is in itself based upon these colonialist ideas. But when TERFs come to that moment of beginning to have this realization of what womanhood can mean, that it can be beyond their experience of womanhood, that if you attempt to define womanhood simply, that it will ultimately support some form of harm. Instead of making that realization and taking it to its natural conclusion, which would mean they would have to place themselves into a more accurate understanding of the systemic harm that they themselves help perpetuate and are complicit in, even if they didn't intend to be, they instead revolt against this idea, and instead define womanhood as solely through their own experience and cast all those trying to let themselves into that definition as villains trying to rip it away from them.
If any male person can call himself a woman or legally identify as female, then predatory men will do so in order to gain access to women's single-sex spaces, and this puts every woman and girl at risk.
The essence of this debate and what we're losing is literally the word woman to mean adult human female.
I have the human right to identify a male when I see one, and I'm not giving that up, and that's what it comes down to.
If they had to see us any differently, they would have to realize that they are contributing to the harms themselves. But they can't think that way. They have to sort of push it upon other people. They can't think of themselves as the bad person. Our society today constantly tells people that they are the heroes of their own story, so they can't perpetuate any type of harm. They can't put that in their brain. The less you think about intersecting identities or experience intersecting identities of oppression yourself, the more likely you're going to be to filter all experiences through your one singular lens and how you experience that oppression. I spoke about Dave Chappelle doing something very similar in his controversial stand-up special, where he argued that race, gender, and LGBTQ issues were all separate fights, and why he framed the LGBTQ community as a ubiquitous community.
You know who hates me the most? The transgender community. Yo, yeah, these motherfuckers, I mean, I didn't realize how bad it was. These motherfuckers, I was really mad about that last Netflix special.
And then the trans community got mad as they started calling her a TERF. I didn't even know what that was. But I know that trans people make up words to win arguments.
Lesbians get mad at me, but I'm gonna tell you right now, and this is true. These transgenders, these want me dead.
Instead of recognizing that there are black women and black trans women within the LGBTQ community and that we don't all agree. And the same goes to Sal Grover, only able to filter any idea of oppression through the lens of misogyny faced by a white woman. Instead, people try to make these systems of oppression invisible and ingrain them into the very systems we use every day, like growing algorithm usage. And when we look out into the larger landscape, we can see more and more these invisible systems are being wielded and being given over to those in power who want nothing more than to place themselves in power continually. Look at Elon Musk's Twitter takeover and his repeated attempts to capitalize on the algorithm and blocking down people making fun of him, all in the name of free speech. All of this has led to many trans people and LGBTQ people and other marginalized groups feeling unsafe on his platform by his allowing of hate speech. We can also even look at it just in theoretical concepts. Look at Mark Zuckerberg's failing metaverse attempt. We could create boundless realities with something like the metaverse, and yet all he wants to do is create endless corporate environments, and where he gets to determine our avatars and what we look like.
Hey, are you coming?
Yeah, just gotta find something to wear. All right, perfect.
A Mark Zuckerberg metaverse deeply scares me because that would lead me to ask questions of, can you exist as a trans person, a person of color, a disabled person, a fat person, a queer person, when it's Mark Zuckerberg that gets to determine what you look like and the worlds you get to inhabit? When he gets to define the realities and bounds of your identity that you get to express within his limited worldview. Virtual realities, algorithms, social media spaces, these are all future systems that are being imbued with our own human biases that will be literally built into our realities that we will be soon asked to inhabit. And we're being asked to inhabit more and more. Ultimately, these systems will only benefit the powerful and limit identities to only those that those in power are willing to see and recognize, and often will give greater weight to the identities that they are a part of. And women like Sal Grover fail to recognize the most important aspect in how we fight back against these encroaching realities. By building diverse communities that do not recreate systems of the past, but create new ones that accept us all, that do not put limits on humanity, but rather endlessly broaden them. Sal is only trying to be the new Mark Zuckerberg, only recreate the system to let herself and a few others like her be at the top. We can create new boundaries or destroy them all. We can create galaxies, new realities. All it takes is a little bit of imagination and community. But the foundation for that needs to start right here. Hey all you dorks out there! Thank you for watching the video, and yeah, sadly I had to put on normal human clothing because I have to look professional for the big announcement. Okay, I'm still wearing the trans fingerless gloves, but like, have ya seen these things? I can't not wear them. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video. This one has been in the works for quite a while now. Like, I believe I wrote the first draft of this one way back at the beginning of last year, so it's been cooking for a hot minute. And shout out to the beautiful Needless for killing it on the editing, by the way. Like, did you see some of the stuff he did? It was real cool. Or at least, I think it was cool. My level of understanding what cool is slightly different than the rest of the world, but I thought it was cool. So, there you go. But moving on, I did say at the beginning of this video that I had a capital B, capital A big announcement. And yeah, it's like dream project big, and I'm really excited to share it with all of you. But before I get to that, I do have to say a little bit of a preamble, because the version of the announcement you're getting now is not the actual version of this announcement that I had been planning for quite literally months up until this point. Like, quite literally up until last week, before I released this video essay, I had been planning to announce what this project is, and that I was going to be doing a Kickstarter campaign to get it off the ground. But literally, right at the last minute, and I mean right at the last minute, something incredible happened that changed everything. Like, Fire Nation attacked changed everything, and it made the project even bigger and even better than it already was. If you want to understand how last minute a lot of this stuff was, I quite literally forgot to unschedule the old version of this video essay that you're watching right now that had the Kickstarter version of the announcement that actually went up for about 2 hours last week. So yeah, some of you got a little preview of this video essay and of the old version of the announcement. Let me stop burying the lead on this. The announcement is that I have officially written and will be directing an upcoming sci-fi short film that I am so excited and pumped about. Like, legit, look at the concept art that I put on the screen right now for this. Like, I'm gonna be doing that in live action, and that's not even the coolest part of it. Kind of like jumping up and down at the idea of the stuff that I have planned for this thing. This project is something that's meaningful for me to tell as the story, but also meaningful to me to make. It's going to be science fiction, it's going to be super queer and trans, and also really weird because it's me, in all of the best ways. And I'm also going to be able to tell this story with people that I am really excited and kind of shocked that I'm getting to work with, because they are some of the coolest people that I've ever like looked up to and wanted to know, and to now say that they're colleagues and friends and collaborators, I'm kind of in awe of. But because of that, I'm sure you've noticed that I haven't exactly said what the big last minute change was last week, or even what this sci-fi short film will be about, or who I'm working on with this project. And that's because, due to what happened last week, I've been able to take what this short film is and make it even cooler, so I wanted to make this announcement even bigger and share my excitement with not just myself and you, but with the people that I'm working on it with and some of the people who help make it possible. And the reason that I want to do it that way is because if you're anything like me, the world's felt really dark lately. I'm not going to go into the specifics of it. Some of you may already know some of the specifics that's been going on with me outside of stuff, but it's been really rough for me personally lately, and I know it's been the same and even rougher for a lot of queer and trans people and people who are just often made to feel like they aren't considered worthwhile. I mean, our lives are made to feel like they're a constant discourse, and it's been a lot. So for me personally, having this project that feels exciting and hopeful and getting to build it with cool people and finally getting a win that feels incredibly legitimizing has reminded me why working with community to build something, not just fight for something, is why I like to create and make things. and I want to share that feeling with all of you. So, this coming weekend, on Saturday, March 4th, I'm going to just kind of use this as an excuse to have a big event celebration, and I'm going to be doing a live stream from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. Pacific time, where I'll talk even more about this project, and all will be revealed. Ooh, that sounds mysterious. Ooh, all will be revealed. No, probably should not do the evil laugh. Anyways, all will be revealed on the live stream, and I'm going to have a few special guests to help me announce this thing, including
Princess Weeks, Foreign Man in a Foreign Land, people who have literally worked on Star Trek, and a few other guests that we are still confirming.
I haven't finalized the guest list as of this recording, so I'm hoping editor me just put in a cool list of people there. And on top of that, there's going to be people that I'm working on this project with, and we'll be talking about not only my short film and why it's meaningful to me, not just in front of the camera, behind it, but also I want to take this as a chance to connect with other creators beyond my project, to just share kindness, positivity, and community in a way that I think we often tend to forget is not only possible, but very unique on a platform like YouTube. Because stuff like this that I'm going to be able to do is only possible not only because of the creators here, but because of all of you. And I want you all to be able to feel the positivity with me and everyone else at the same time, and not just have this be a single announcement in a single one-off video. So please come to the live stream this weekend, Saturday, March 4th, 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. Pacific time. You don't want to miss it. And don't worry, if you can't make it live, I will upload some of the stuff later on, and you'll get all the deets and all that cool stuff, but come and join us because I think it'll be a really fun time for everyone that's there. The only other thing I will say to prep you for what the rest of the announcement is, to give you a little tease, because again, I'm a little bit of a tease, you may want to consider signing up for Nebula, the award-winning streaming service that my fellow creators and I have set up to be able to do cool projects and not have to worry so much about being at the behest of the YouTube algorithm. Nebula has allowed creators like the amazing Abigail Thorne of PhilosophyTube to release her recent film-length project, The Prince, which is an amazing, weird, trans, and queer Shakespeare multiverse play filmed and released as a Nebula original. Super nerdy as hell, and it's exclusive to Nebula and was only able to be released because of Nebula. So maybe that's sort of what might be possible for other creators you may know who have big dream projects that are also super weird and super queer and sci-fi. Just saying. So with all that said, please consider signing up for the annual plan of Nebula with my link below so that you can get to see The Prince right now, help me pay my bills, see tons of exclusive videos from your favorite creators, and also help specific, as yet unnamed creators who might have big things that they'll be releasing within the next year to get to do other cool projects as well. And don't forget to join me this Saturday for what will hopefully be a super fun and positive live stream and the rest of my announcement about my short film. So, sorry to continue to be a tease, but you know what? No, I'm not sorry. I'm a tease. It's how I do. But until then, live long and prosper, you beautiful humans. This is a lot cooler when you do the live long and prosper with the trans flag on it. You know what? I am the arbiter of cool. This is cool. This is cool. Right here. This is it. Hey. Hey, you. Yeah, you. You cutie patootie nerds. Cutie patootie. I'm a goddamn 1920s grandma. Anyways, thank you all you wonderful nerds who are my patrons, who allow me to do this, who allow me to do what I do. I could not do this YouTube channel. I could not pay my bills. I could not support my baby Newt, my kitty Newt, without all of you. So thank you so much for all of that. And an extra special thank you to Catherine Lambeth, Carrie Ellen Foss, Joe Herman Holt, Miranda Janelle, Lily Gray, Ogisha Weiss, Mary Mello, Heather Long, El Tantivy, Barbie Ann Rounds, Jack McCallan, Stephen Kleinard, Quattro, Michael Wolnes, Courtney Ray Kelly, Jem Shin, Allie Gobert, Alex Miller, Barbara Ruski, Randy Thompson, Matt Chung, Christian Hurst, Spooky Heather, Sylvia, Alan Altman, Super Desi, Wellington Marcus, Christine S., Brits Krieg, Zach Cody, Screaming Vixen, Lily Bailey, Jessica Kimbrough, Boyd Earl, Vincent Ellington, Meadow, Whisper, Felicia Tost, Chloe Dollar, Joseph Dewey, Marshall Nye, James Krivda, Gordon Alexander, Rose Connolly, Jane Slusser, Dominic Noble, Laura Nur, Zone 1 Librarian, Jennifer Fuss, Weirdly Beardly, Chris Bodley Dinch, Sunk Corgi, Sean McKenzie, Sonia Nero-Perdo, Nathaniel Fraughton, Hellscape Wanderer, Jolene Cassidy, Farangato. Ooh, they kind of rhymed. Transit Toronto, Paney Coke, Rain Corkin, Wenda's Abizzle, Ryan Hunter, Spencer Brownlee, John Weatherby, Damian Rice, W. Randy Eady, Sage Corbett, Tang Wilson, Wayne L., Belinda Walters, Nisa Marie. Hopefully I said that right. I'm sorry if I didn't. Kilara Arell, Stephen Richardson, Zach Prax, Carrie On, Drew Bach, Beatrix Purvis, Cyber Quicker, Jade Parissis, Kevin Frotek, Autumn Jenny, Maddie H, Matthew Correglo, Sean Piper, Sean Sullivan, Lysa Flynn. Epsilon is greater than The Mighty Ginger Joe, duh. Devin Camerlocker, Flying Cated Dragon, Melody Ann Winters Good, Mark H. Williams author, Sally Leslie Hutchkins, Sarah Bystam, Casual Observer, Gretchen Badger, William Stewart, Marion Herv, Jordan Long, Katie K, Patricia Crompton, Michael and Kate Hawk. Blueberry Hill, Vertex Kai, Jess Johnson, Sarah Lemero, Skyskinner, Joe Comics, Chris Hurst, Keefus Kaiser, Laura Demereau, Kurt Mullen, Becky Sparks, Nathan Steele, Mick Sophus, Joe Hieresis, Joshua Swanson Blue, Celestial Dawn, Leah Boyd, Troy Stull, Jason Knott, Zumila Kincaid, Jordy Lisero, Tony the DC Nerd, The Tipsy Changeling, Maeve, Luna T, Zophiel L, Grumpy Dragon 75, Nikki Gordon Bloomfield, Crit Fact, Strawberry Pup-Tart, Kalis, Shield Maiden 4444, Fox E, Adam RDL Taylor, Kingy, Alexandra Lombach, It's a Bug, Not a Feature, Ulrich Bogdan, Barbara Borges, Abigail Marie, James Hodge, Corey and Vale, Honkinen. Mwah. Love you all. You're amazing. Take care of yourselves, my friends. You dorks.